Thank you very much for the invitation to come here today and take part in this. I'm going to take you through a bit of a whirlwind in the next 20 minutes. Rob, you've got your work cut out for you because you're already 15 minutes late. So it means either that we're going to end on time and have the drinks, or we're going to shorten lunch. But anyway, I'm going to do you a quick whirlwind. As Rob said, my name's Craig. I have spent 20 years being a maritime journalist for Lloyd's List and now Tradewinds. In between, did my own thing. And I was about 10 years at sea. So I am going to push through sort of like what's going on in shipping from my perspective. So this is totally my perspective of what we see going on. We've already heard about what's happening in the Middle East, about what's going on there, and about how seafarers are not able to get out. We keep on hearing that story about seafarers not being able to get out. Of course, we need the ships to go in as well. So we need seafarers on the ships coming into the Gulf as well. Don't just talk about seafarers going out. We need the seafarers willing to go in as well. So that has to be discussed. So we have an industry that for many years people said was invisible. In 2018, I went to conferences and people were saying that shipping should have one voice. Who's going to be that voice of shipping? Now, shipping is actually, it's quite an amoeba of a sort of sector, isn't it? There's no one voice. But then we had COVID, and we talked about having seafarers designated as sort of key workforce. Then we had the Suez Canal, when we saw just how fragile supply chains had become. Then we had the Straits of Hormuz, then we had what was going on in the Red Sea. We had piracy, and then the Houthis. And it all led to shipping being very much in the forefront of everybody's minds. It's on television, CNN, BBC. Of course, it's all over Tradewinds. It's all I write about. But we write about more about that in Tradewinds than just the doom and gloom. So seafarers are very much in the line of fire when it comes to this. And we have seen stories about the seafarers that are trapped in there. I heard reports that water had gone up 5 times. The price of water had gone up 5 times what it was to be able to, for crews. So there were a lot of things. And I spoke to some seafarers. I had a few email exchanges with seafarers who had just got off the ships, and they actually told me they're not going to go back. They really are questioning whether they want to have a career at sea. Now, as Rob said, it's not all doom and gloom, but let's just be realistic about this. Let's, as the Americans say, stay off the Kool-Aid. There's a lot going on in the background of shipping as well, okay? We have all of the political discussions about decarbonisation. Where's that going to lead? Is it on? Is it off? Are we expecting too much in terms of regulations? Is it going to happen? The conversations about CO2, by the way, I've been writing about for 20 years, almost since I started as a journalist. It's not new, it's just coming to a crescendo now. Shipping has got this ability to deal with what is thrown at it. Like I said, it's a bit like an amoeba. We create regulations created for it, it will do it. We talked about the sulfur cap, it happened, no problem. Single hull tankers had to be scrapped and all the double hull tankers, it happened. Nobody talks about that anymore. We have ways of actually dealing with things, and companies start to adapt early. There are always the front runners, willing to go ahead and actually start looking at what they can do to get the advantage. There are issues that have to be taken on board with that, and there are the tech firms that are going to push that agenda as well to make sure that what's happening is there. Underneath the change, there's a lot going on from the technology companies, from the shipping companies, from the policy makers, etc. But we have to be careful what we do. Like I said, we have to be careful about what sort of messages we send and where we go with things. So there are risks around all of this, but there is opportunity, and I'm going to come to all of that in a second. Now, we're going to touch on, I think, in the next panel, areas of digitalization, and Simon mentioned that a second ago. Everybody's talking about automation and digital automation, and where's that going to go? I would raise one big question here about the level of automation and where it's going to go, because quite frankly, it could easily be brought to a stop. And this is where we've all gone around telling all the crews not to take little USB sticks, haven't we? That's the easy way out. Blame the crew. It always seems to be blaming the crew. It's not. There's hackers that are going to be able to. There was a hackathon in Singapore during Singapore Maritime Week, and I spoke to a couple of people who went there, and they said, yeah, I hacked into an autopilot. It was easy. I hacked into a system, send satellite signals. I could actually redistribute a whole constellation of satellites if I wanted to. It's that easy. We can do it. So stop blaming the crew, but look at having these solutions that you're aware of what's going on. Now, we touched on a minute ago the fact that there is a huge order book. Apparently, it's almost close to being an order book similar to what we saw in 2008. That was when the crash happened, if you remember, and a lot of ship owners suddenly found that their order books were way too high and started to have a lot of discussions with the shipyards. So, but at the same time, the going is good, so all the ship owners have still got older vessels. So we've got a flip side here. We've got older ships with more standard vessel kind of engines, but with the risks that comes with that. And then we've got a new building race that's going to require manning. We haven't changed the manning rules. They're still going to need, so we're going to need all those crews to go on there. But how are you going to get the people to agree? Are these cadets and officers going to be your future? The answer is yes, but what comes up behind them? How are you going to attract people to the industry? Yes, we have AI, and I've spoken to the likes of Orca AI and a couple of others that want to push automation, and they say, no, it's not about taking the crew off of the ship. They say that because they know there's a lot of criticism about that. Frankly, it is about taking the crew off the ship, because they then say, yeah, but then we can automate anything, so there could be fewer officers and crew on the ship. So it kind of is there as well. So are we able to do this? Are we pushing this agenda too quickly that we're dissuading future cadets from going to sea, future officers from staying at sea, quicker than we can get the IT to come and replace it? And how do we then convince them? And this is the big question for you. How do we convince society that shipping is sexy? How do we get that message out? I'm not talking about, oh, we've got to get that balance right. We've got to get people coming in to the industry. I had a joke with Rob last night. We often say that we recruit the best. We don't. I failed my A-levels and went to sea. I became the man I became because I went to sea. We don't go to sea because we are potential Oxford graduates. That's not why we go to sea. We're not the best of the best. But we have the potential of becoming diamonds out of the rough stones that we have. That's what shipping is all about, and that is what we have to remember. People who go to sea become diamonds. They don't start as diamonds. So we have new technologies coming into this industry. So who has to deal with innovation? They do. Now, innovation isn't new. I think that, you can see who I worked for there, by the way. Anybody know what that is? It's not so the captain did not get the sun in his eyes in his daybed. It's a windshield, basically, to deflect the wind around the accommodation block. That was being used in the 1980s during the oil crisis in the 80s to try and get the ships to save fuel. I also worked on LNG carriers. Anybody seen that? You won't get it anymore. It's an aft-loading platform on an LNG carrier that used to run between Brunei and Japan. They go stern first onto the jetty, so it was quicker, load the cargo, and if you look around the accommodation, that's the loading. I used to go to my bunk and listen to the LNG whittling around to the accommodation by my ear, okay? But we've got a lot that's going on today, and this is where anybody who's going to sea would think, oh my God, this is really exciting. This is the message. We have technologies that are emerging to meet all of these regulations and things that we have got going on, not just the digitalization, because that is engaging as well. We got onboard carbon capture. We got systems that will be able to convert one fuel to another fuel. We got wind, of course. We got about 100 ships already at sea using wind propulsion of one sort of or the other. And there are companies, Oceanbird is a joint venture with Valenius and Alfa Laval. They don't want to use wind as a wind propulsion assistant system. They want wind to be the main propulsion. They want to build ships that have got 4 systems on board, and that becomes 80% of the power. The main engine is no longer the main engine, it's auxiliary to provide the assistance to the wind. We've got hydrogen fuel engines coming on. There's tests in Japan for hydrogen fuel engines, and there's talk about a lot of engines being able to do drop-in fuels with hydrogen. And then nuclear. Nuclear, about 3 years ago, nuclear was nowhere, and all of a sudden it's now being talked about in great depth because of small modular reactors that are being developed. I've spoken to a few companies in the US that are actually testing in Idaho now a modular reactor. So, like I said, who's going to deal with the consequences of today's decisions? Well, the seafarers, obviously. They're the ones that not only are going to have to go to sea and make that decision to go to sea, you need them to stay at sea. You need them to be there through all of this change. It is a period of change. As Simon said, it's huge change that's going on. New fuels, new technologies, new ideas, new digitalization. Yes, we're more connected, but my God, there's a lot more to it as well. So it is getting sexier. This is an industry that's getting sexier. Don't be so doom and gloom, okay? Be realistic about it, but this is an industry that is going through a huge amount of change. I can tell you, if I wasn't a journalist covering all of this, which I think is really exciting, I would love to be going back to sea as a cadet, just to be able to see how this is happening. All right, I get paid more now, but never mind. So, in a nutshell, and I'm not going to go through the quotes, but I want you to do something today. If you're using Slido, tell me at the end of the day who's got the best quotes. Was it Rob with Ford? Was it Simon with Winston Churchill? Or Seneca, the Greek philosopher who said, luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. Francis Stokes is an American playwright. The sea finds out everything that you did wrong. So, thank you. You can find me there. That's me on my first ship. And there's me. Thank you.